You're about to listen to the Complete Developer Podcast, the podcast by coders, for coders, about all aspects of life as a developer.
I'm Will, the curmudgeonly experienced developer.
And I'm Beej, the optimistic newbie developer. Welcome to another episode of Complete Developer Podcast. This week, we're talking about keeping your mind sharp. We'll start off with some studies on the effects of programming on the brain, then discuss the benefits of actively keeping your mind sharp. Next, we'll briefly go over some of the general tips for sharpening your mind, but the majority of the episode will be spent on specific tips for developers to keep your coding skills sharp. But before we get started, Will, what have you been fighting this week?
I've had some medical stuff. I've, I had the full length beard up until March, and after I shaved it, I noticed a lump on the underside of my neck, right under the. There's a mandibular gland there, and there's also a lymph node. It's swollen up, and it's visible from a distance.
Yeah, I can see it all the way over here.
Yeah, and so I had to go to the ENT this morning and get it looked at, and then they're like, want to do a CAT scan, and they may have to do a biopsy, and I don't know what it is. Could be a swollen lymph node, could be it's probably not cancer. It could be a conjoined twin that never was born, probably not. There's no telling what it is. But anyway, I got to get this thing looked at and figured out. So that's what I dealt with this morning, and going to be apparently dealing with it for a while now. And I've decided that I think the thing needs a name, and since it's swollen and irritated, and you can't really tell for sure what it's actually trying to be, I'm going to name it Azure. Because that's the other thing I've been dealing with. is Azure is really ticking me off a lot here lately because I've had all the problems with payment. They're holding a domain hostage. They're not really holding it hostage because it's more like they've just lost it, just flat out like they don't have it. And we're trying to get it back for some stuff that we've already done. We're ready to use this domain name, and we've already built assets for it and spent some money, and they can't seem to get it back. So there's that. And then there's been all kinds of billing problems with my Visual Studio subscription because, the card was canceled, or the card wasn't canceled, but they were blocked on there because they kept billing me for stuff that I wasn't using. And once they got that sorted out, then now they've decided that, this card was blocked at one point, so it's never good again. And I've been going round and round with them. I'm going to have to get on the phone with them during working hours at some point to get this straightened out.
Grief.
And so, yeah, if it's like, if it's some kind of cyst or tumor or something, I'm naming it Azure.
What if it's a conjoined twin?
If it's a conjoined twin, I don't know, maybe Fox Pro.
That's good.
Yeah, because by then it'll be egg-sized, right? So how about you?
Well, nothing quite that interesting. I've been fighting expression trees with Link to Hibernate, trying to search the properties of a nested object. I can do what I want with a lot of if statements, but I'm trying to refactor that to, be better code.
Yeah, so it's just one round trip, and it gets exactly what you want.
Exactly.
Those are the kind of problems I enjoy.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's a lot of fun. It's frustrating, but it's a good challenge. I'm enjoying working on it.
Well, and I prepared you to some degree to deal with expression trees too. There's a lot of senior developers that just don't. They can't get their head around what that is. And it's really not that complicated. It's just that every time you look something up on it, they put it in gobbledygook.
That's part of the problem I'm having is I don't want to say documentation so much as just answers.
There isn't any?
Yeah, there isn't any. So more like answers to questions, even on Stack Overflow, which is normally my go-to place. They're either super specific to one particular issue, which is not the one I'm having, and not helpful for anything else, or they make no sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
Well, I can't find the issue that I'm having on anywhere, and so I've been tempted to to post a question about it, but because this is for work, I'd probably have to get permission to do that. So
yeah, or you could make a sample that looks kind of the same, that exhibits the same qualities. Because I had to do that with some Delphi code.
Yeah.
Last week, because I'm like, there's no way I'm putting our code on there. Of course, mine was, mine was a little bit weird. It was something I didn't realize was doing dumb until the realization was made apparent.
While writing this episode, I answered my first question on Quora.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, already got enough upvotes to be second on the list for that question.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That and 75 cents, you can get a cup of coffee, man. No, you really can't.
No,
not for 75 cents.
Like,
not anywhere you would get coffee.
Yeah, like maybe $5.75.
Maybe someplace I would get coffee. Like the grocery store in a Folgers can.
I didn't realize the other day, though, that I was sitting at work and had this realization come over me that if I wasn't there doing what I was doing, I'd be doing something very similar at home.
Yeah.
Like, it was just like this thing that just, this wave of realization hit me that I'm at work getting paid to do
what you'd be doing anyway.
What I want to do.
Yeah.
Like, what I would be spending my time doing.
And once you get there, it's like, yeah, that's development.
Mm-hmm. No, I do want to say for our listeners out there that may still be in the learning area or starting to look, I know it can be really tough looking for a job, especially when you put in at hundreds of places and get turned down hundreds of times. Keep going.
Yeah.
It's so worth it. You get that job when you're sitting at your desk doing what you're supposed to be doing, getting paid to do something
that you
enjoy. It's so worth it. Let's go ahead and roll the music. This week for IoT, we kind of want to talk about something that happened recently with Internet of Things security. We had a DDoS attack, or DDoS, or Distributed Denial of Service attack. Will, would you like to elaborate on what that is?
Sure. It's where somebody, well, a bunch of somebodies probably, or somebody controlling a botnet gets a whole bunch of machines to attack one machine. So yeah, it basically chokes the network traffic. It'll choke, hard disk access on the machine, depending on what the architecture is. But basically, they took down a pretty sizable chunk of the eastern seaboard.
Yeah. Well, they attacked a major provider.
Yeah, Dime, which is, I have my DNS for the house is through there. The rest of it is, through GoDaddy, but is out of the dynamic DNS. And, that morning, I was seeing, spikes and attempted attacks on my router, too. So I guess that's where it was coming from.
I read an interesting article by Brian Krebs, because the way they got in was through malware on IoT devices. He states many of these products from, we won't mention the company, and other makers of inexpensive, mass-produced IoT devices are essentially unfixable and will remain a danger to others unless and until they are completely unplugged from the internet. That's because while many of these devices allow users to change the default username and passwords on a web-based administration panel that ships with the products, those machines can still be reached via more obscure, less user-friendly communication services such as Telnet and SSH.
Yeah. And I mean, that's how you would want to be able to administer those anyway. Although, at this point, it's like, are you really sure you want to Telnet into that? Unless it's really, really a device that doesn't have a lot of horsepower, like you at least need to encrypt the channel between the two and have some kind of key exchange. And SSH helps with that. Of course, it doesn't help if you're like, oh, well, we'll let you connect anyway. There's.
Yeah. What I understood from the article was that these companies produce like different parts that go into devices. And so it was through these individual parts that access was gained to networks.
Especially webcams and all that, which I don't know if you remember a couple years back, the head of the FBI, I think it was Comey, the guy that's up there now, was like, yeah, I put a piece of tape over my webcam at all times.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, "Oh, that's really paranoid." And they're like, "Wait, this is the head of the FBI. That's not paranoia. That ought to tell you something."
I don't, because who really wants to see that?
Yeah. You know, there's like some guy in a control room puking. Yeah, buddy. Turn that camera on. See what you get.
I'm just thinking, you know, if you really want to see me scratching my beard, watching TV, and playing on the internet,
You
go
can,
ahead.
all you got to do is show up with beer. You can watch that without the camera. A lot easier that way.
So who's talking to us this week?
We've had quite a few comments on Twitter from Curtis Carter. We thought we would read one on the air. It's Thursday, and we have another great episode of At Complete Dev Pod. I have nightmares about freelancing again, and they can explain why. yes, we can.
Curtis, thank you so much for the comment. Your other comments and tweets have not gone unnoticed. Especially liked one that you had about our episode with John Sonmez recently. But we do have some CDP swag just for you. Shoot either Will or myself or at Complete Dev Pod DM, and we'll get in touch with you and get that sent out to you. Guys, if you'd like some Complete Developer swag, leave us a review in iTunes, comment on the website or any of our social media. We are now on Path and Tumblr as of about a week ago. And we also post all our episodes to Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Google+. Hey guys, I just wanted to interrupt here to tell y'all about Codeland, a new conference put on by our friends over at Code Newbies. It's going to take place up in New York on April 21st and 22nd. You can check it out at codelandconf.com. And if you sign up before November 16th, you'll be able to get the early bird pricing and come up and meet me at a conference. I want to start this episode off talking about the effects of programming on the brain. A recent study done by Dr. Janet Siegmund that looked at the brains of programmers. She took functional MRIs of coders while they were comprehending short code snippets and contrasted that with locating syntax errors.
Huh.
So like the control was an activity of locating syntax errors, and what she was looking at was comprehending code snippets. What they found was...
And this was fMRI?
Yes.
You know, we have a friend that's doing that, or that did a bunch of stuff with that.
Andre?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he would.
Yeah, he's the guy that has to find the very difficult thing to do.
Yeah, well...
He's not happy.
If you've listened to some of our other episodes where we talk about not being the smartest person in the room...
He doesn't have another choice.
Yeah, he has trouble finding a room to go to.
Yeah, he's a sharp dude.
He really is.
And
he's a nice guy, too.
Yeah, and this stuff really interests me a lot.
Yeah.
So they compared finding syntax errors with, and this is neural activation.
Yeah.
So they compared it with language processing. And
And so what they found was a pattern emerged in 5 regions of the brain: the language processing, working memory, and attention. And one of the conclusions they came to through this and a few other studies is that coding blurs the lines between math and language.
What is math? Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go all meta.
Well, the thing is, there's been previous studies that shows that when you're doing math, different areas of the brain are activated than when you're processing language.
Well, and language has got an inherent problem in that our language is developed during a time when we were hunting large animals with pointy sticks.
Yeah.
And they don't have the rigor that you have to have for mathematics to work. That's why we have symbolic mathematics.
They also, in other studies, have shown that the trial and error process that is done with most coding helps strengthen mental capabilities. And they've done this with teaching web development to...
rhesus monkeys?
I was going to say older, like retirees.
Oh, that's good, because if it was rhesus monkeys, there's too many PHP developers already. Sorry, I didn't
That's
mean
bad,
to be mean.
dude.
That was
bad.
mean. Because we know they'd be using Java.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Can you tell he's a .NET coder? But no, they were looking at helping to prevent cognitive decline in geriatric population and found that teaching web development skills and specifically the trial and error process of messing up and trying to figure out, debugging and figuring out what went wrong and how to solve that actually strengthened their mental capabilities. So this leads right into why you need to keep your mind sharp. A couple of quick points here is it helps to increase your motivation and your focus, increases creativity and inspiration. And like we stated earlier, it helps to prevent cognitive decline. And honestly, if that's not enough for you, then why are you listening? No, just kidding. So, before we get into the real meat of the episode, I do want to go over a few general tips for keeping your mind sharp. And the first one, and the one that I found on almost every website I looked at doing the research for this, is keep learning. Now, I've broken that down into two categories. That's deeper learning and broader learning. Deep and wide, deep and wide.
Really? Is that where we're going now?
The deeper learning are learning more details about the languages you already know. So getting deeper into the .NET framework or the C# for myself and Will. Broader learning is learning a new language or expanding your knowledge base in that way. So it would be Will learning Delphi.
Yeah.
Me learning material design, it's still JavaScript, which is something I know. So I guess that's technically more deeper learning.
Yeah, it is, but it isn't because there's so much CSS in there.
But I already know CSS. Well, I don't know CSS, but I already know about... Oh.
Yeah, nobody knows CSS. CSS is like Zen, man. When you know it, it's gone.
Yeah.
The way I look at learning is kind of weird.
Well, the way you look at most things is kind of weird.
Yeah. I look at it as a multi-level marketing scheme because breadth gives stability. Depth gives profit. It's like a pyramid scheme for your brain. And so both of these things are kind of in the mix, but
think about it this way. This is for keeping your mind sharp, but just generally speaking for what you're saying goes kind of along with this. The broad knowledge base that I have, the .NET, JavaScript, Angular, that's what got me in the door. I don't want to say that's what got me the job, but I mean, that's what they were looking for.
That gave you the stability.
Yeah, it did. It gave me the stability to get the job. Now that I'm in there, I'm learning more in-depth about C# and .NET, more in-depth about Angular. I'm learning stuff about Angular that I was nowhere near learning before. Like I would not have gotten to for a long time had I not gotten a job that specifically did it.
That's what I'm saying. It matches the way multi-level marketing schemes work.
Yeah, it does.
In a really screwy, backward kind of...
Well, they had to get those multi-level marketing schemes somewhere.
Yeah.
Next is prioritize your brain power. This is an interesting one because I found some places that said to do this and some that said not to. But I noticed the ones that said not to, I didn't really agree with some of their other stuff, so I kind of...
Yeah, just disregard them.
I'm like, well, I don't know that what they were saying really is
it
as
may
helpful.
not apply.
Yeah. But the idea here is to use calendars, time trackers, or just regular places for things like your keys so that you don't have to worry about remembering them. If you've got a calendar with your, I don't want to say life planned out on it, but with important dates planned out on it and when you're going to do things, you don't have to worry about remembering when, cousin's birthday is.
Yeah. Well, the thing is you have a finite amount of attention. And you burn attention trying to remember things too. So if you put that in a system where you don't have to remember things, that gives you more of that resource to work with for things that actually give you improvement. Mm-hmm. It's the difference between a productive asset and an unproductive asset.
Next is daily exercise, both mental and physical. And mental exercises could be working puzzles, solving math problems without a calculator.
Which I always do because I can never find my calculator.
You don't have one on your phone?
I do, but I don't want to reach. I don't want to like walk like 5 steps and get my phone.
When is your phone ever 5 steps away from you?
Well, when I forget to plug it in, which is pretty frequent.
So this is why I plug mine in my truck when I'm driving, which is great, except for when I take my bike. And then, of course, physical exercise. We've talked about the benefits of that over and over again. We'll keep doing it because it helps mentally, emotionally, physically.
Yeah, it's funny, dying young and sick is really bad for your thought patterns. It's like the worst thing that could happen.
Yeah.
For them, actually.
Next is repetition. It helps emphasize important points.
I see what you did there. The thing is, like when you're meeting people, just repeating their name back is more likely to make it stick than just them telling you.
Oh, yeah.
And part of that is that crossover from different learning styles, and part of it is just the repetition factor.
Next is sensory engagement versus sensory deprivation. And engaging your senses helps to keep your mind sharp, as well as complete sensory deprivation. And Will can talk on this because he's done some sensory deprivation stuff.
I have. I've actually spent 3.5 hours in an isolation tank on one occasion, and then I've spent 90 minutes in there on 4 occasions, I think. The 3.5 hour was actually better, even though that is a long time to be in total darkness. You're in water that's right at body temperature, so you can't feel the edge of your body effectively. It's soundproof. It's weird how it focuses your mind. Like you're being alone with your thoughts is quite good for you. I think at some point maybe we'll get into this a little bit more, but yeah, and that's a huge one. But the other end of that is actually being present. Yes. Because that's really what you mean when you're talking about sensory engagement.
I don't mean like sensory overload. Our mind stores everything. And it's not that it's not there to remember. It's that we remember by connections.
Yes.
The more connections you can make, the easier it is to remember something. This is why smells will cause you to remember something from your childhood.
Yeah. Every time I make these little sweet pickles that are basically candied cucumbers. They've got a lot of sugar in them. They're not healthy at all. I remember my grandmother because she used to make them, and her mother made them too. But I don't remember her doing it. But that brings me back to my childhood. So yeah, smell is a very strong one. Visual is not quite as much for me. Auditory tends to be better than, or not as good as smell, but better than visual.
Visual is for me, but I'm a visual learner. Yeah. This does kind of go back to your learning styles as to the stronger, So you're saying I'm an olfactory learner? No, actually, smells are strongest for most people.
Yeah.
Because you don't purposefully associate those.
Right.
It's more free association, which is why you get that. Finding a creative outlet, such as painting, sculpting, music.
Writing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's mine.
And I like painting and I like some writing, but I tend to be more focused with my writing than creative.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I used to write a lot of poetry back in high school and college.
Well, I mean, I kind of blend it because, I mean, what I'm doing, this stuff I'm working on, I do have to be creative, but it is within a fairly narrow scope.
And there is some creativity with this, with writing outlines and blog posts and stuff too, but I would say my stronger creative outlet is painting than writing. Even going to places like Painting with a Twist or some of those places where you go in and it's like a class type thing where they've done a lot of the hard work for you. There's still a lot of creativity involved there. And it's great for people who may not have the know-how or the patience to learn.
Yeah, the hard stuff.
The hard stuff. You can go in and you can get a feel for it and get a sense of, oh, I'd really like to learn this.
Yeah.
Without, putting in all the money and effort to get all the supplies and then go, I don't really like what I'm learning.
Yeah. I mean, I guess cooking and making wine are kind of my creative outlets in that regard.
Yeah.
It can be pretty much anything.
Mm-hmm. And finally, under kind of general ways to keep your mind sharp is to supplement your memory by writing things down. Personally, I keep a notebook at work, grid notebook, so I can draw and write easily. Some people use Post-it notes. We've already talked about repeating names and important details. And then do some relaxation exercises. Meditation, yoga.
Actually sleeping.
Watching Doctor Who.
Yeah. I mean, you can generally find something meditative in a fair bit of the physical activity or in just kind of just chilling out.
That's true. But I mean, some people like just going for a walk, and that's something that helped me out today.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is like, if you're going to keep your mind sharp things need a sheath. And that's what these practices are for.
So that kind of covers some of the general ideas. And what I really want to spend the majority of the episode on is talking about keeping your coding skills sharp. And as I was doing the research for this, I ran across a question on Quora about it and found just an amazing answer by Marcelo Jucum. A little research, and he works for Facebook. Honestly, Marcelo, if you're listening, which I don't know why you'd be listening to us, if you're listening, get in touch with us. If somebody out there that is listening knows him, send him our way, because the answer was so good. I want to send him some CDP swag just for an answer on Quora, because it was that good. I want to just read to you guys the entire thing, but that might be a little plagiarism.
Yeah, might be.
So we're gonna do things a little bit different for this. Whereas normally what I do is I go through and I get ideas and then write out an outline from the ideas. His stuff was so good that each point I have, I'm going to pull a quote from what he said, and then Will and I are going to discuss it. To start us off, I want to start off with the ABCs of being a complete developer. Do you guys remember the ABCs of sales, which was always be closing? Well, the ABCs of being a complete developer is always be coding. And Marcelo says it, always be coding. Good code, bad code, really doesn't matter. You want to learn a new language?
Go write some bad code. That's the fastest way you could possibly do it.
Yeah, exactly. You want to gain deeper understanding of the language you already know?
Yeah.
Write code in it.
Yeah, especially for weird problems that you've never seen before.
Yeah. Code even when you don't have to do so. I did this when I needed to learn Markdown, but I didn't really have anything legitimate to do it in or to do it for. So I wrote our outlines in Markdown.
Yep.
Which was really annoying when you tried to look at them.
Yes, it was.
Outside of the Markdown. But hey, you know what?
I'm glad you got over that. But yeah, it was really handy to do that.
It helped me a great deal because I learned, that's the way I learned Markdown.
Yep. Same here. Because I did it. I mean, I had done it before, but that solidified my skills quite a bit. Yep. It's like, well, this is the way he wants it. And
it's like Marcelo says, good code, bad code, keep writing it.
Well, you don't know the difference until you've written it for a while.
That's true.
I mean, like, the thing is like avoid that value judgment early on because you really don't even have the experience to make a value judgment. Yeah,
you want to, in doing this, work towards writing more good code than bad code. But write the bad code so that it can become good code.
Well, write the code, right? I mean, like, don't freeze.
Yeah.
Just go. Get something done and then you can iterate on it. It's better to, it's like Patton said, a plan violently executed or a mediocre plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan executed never, or something like that. He said something to that effect.
Well, when I was
kind of like that.
When I was in high school and college, I had an entire notebook of poetry about writer's block. Because when I was trying to write and I had an idea, but I just could not get the words out, I would go and sit and write about not being able to write.
Yeah.
Because I was writing.
Yeah, that gets you moving.
Yeah. And also doing this, you learn to become your own critic and be comfortable being your own critic.
Well, because if you aren't, somebody else will have to be.
Yeah. Next, and this is something that we've really spent some time on with the podcast. We'll probably spend some time talking on it now, is know your algorithms. And the quote I have for this one: don't just use them, know them. Implement, test, experiment. Push them to the limits.
Yeah. You got to know where the algorithm fails before you really can make it succeed. In the edge cases where it doesn't work, because what you don't want to do is implement something that doesn't. And I'll have to see if I can find it, but there is a Stack Overflow discussion where a guy used a tree data structure for a family tree and got burnt by it after his software was already out because he didn't think about where that's going to fall down. And the case where it falls down is, okay, well, if you have 15 generations of people, that's not a tree, that's a directed acyclic graph. Because those people are going to be related somewhere back there. And of course, in his case, it was more like 2 generations back. But, it was a big problem. And it's because he didn't push the algorithm to know where the limits were. The understanding where the limits are will get you further than just about anything else.
And not just your algorithms, know your data structures.
Yeah. Well, that's what this was.
Yeah.
It was the data structure. Well, it was the data. It was a combination of the data structure and the algorithm, really, because it's how do you iterate over the nodes in a tree versus a directed acyclic graph. Because if you're going, okay, I'm going up from a leaf node to some ancestor node. Well, that's great if I want to have a one path going up, but it turns out there's 2 or 3 or 5 because these people are inbred. Mm-hmm. Suddenly the algorithm doesn't work, and you better know that. Yeah.
Kind of like the code that I had the other day that
was inbred?
Yeah, it was inbred code. No, the code that worked the first time. I'm like, what did I do wrong? Because it's not supposed to work the first time.
Yeah, my code never works. What are you talking about?
And it wasn't until I went to work on another problem or build something else that I realized, it doesn't work with nulls at all.
Yeah.
And I had to go back and rewrite the whole thing. But yeah, if I had had that in mind.
Well, the thing is like, talking about your previous experiences, you impressed an interviewer a while back. I think it was something you couldn't remember how to do something with link. And so it was a sort algorithm. That's what it was.
Oh, yeah.
And you're like, oh, well, here's how to do a bubble sort. And you just like totally just implement it on the board, and there, that proved that you had the insider knowledge, because it's like, okay, well, I can go look up that method name and I know what it's actually doing under the hood. So we're good.
And this leads right into the next point, which is don't get addicted to frameworks.
Yeah.
And the quote I got for this is, the good thing about frameworks is that they solve the hard problems so you don't have to. The bad thing about frameworks is that they solve the hard problems and you can't learn from them.
And, this is why I don't like things like Entity Framework, is because they hide the complexity of SQL. Mm-hmm. And they make it where people, like developers, even senior developers I know, can't write SQL. They can't do a select, and actually be effective. And like they can't troubleshoot and go, okay, why is this slow? It's because they've been using a framework the whole time and they've been able to get away without it. Yeah, and my
SQL skills aren't super strong.
Yeah, but you're better than a lot of developers, because I've made sure of that. I'll beat you about the head and shoulders till you get that right.
I can go into our dev database and do stuff in SQL.
And the other thing is when you skip the framework and you go lower level, a lot of times it's more fun. I mean, that's the big thing. The Delphi stuff that I've been doing is great, because like if I get a string, I have to know how that string is formatted. Like, we had the whole episode about text manipulation. Yeah. Like, I have to know that. It's like, is this a pointer to an ANSI character array or the Unicode? Like, what's the width of the characters? Like, how is it encoded? How am I receiving it? Who owns that pointer? Who allocated that memory? I'm having to deal with that stuff.
It comes down to, are you a software engineer or an API user?
Yeah. In other words, are you the guy that is on the assembly line making the Model T, which is fine, or are you the guy that is an artisan that's putting the car together? It's more like, are you the guy on the assembly line, putting that widget on, to have the door on, or are you the guy that can modify the car?
Or are you the guy that's designing the car?
And because one of those guys gets paid more.
Yeah.
And probably enjoys their life a whole lot better, and they don't get repetitive strain injuries.
Mm-hmm. Don't become over-reliant on your framework. You want to be able to understand the underlying workings. And a lot of times framework features can become confused with the functionality of the language.
Well, C# is like that.
Yeah.
Because, we've had the .NET framework, which is different than C#. And now that everybody's going to .NET Core, or they're starting to move in that direction, a whole lot of people's cheese is getting moved.
Well, one thing that I have heard said is, I would rather .NET than C#.
Yeah.
Like, if you're a VB developer, if you know .NET, you can learn the C# because it's pretty much framework.
Yeah.
That's something that popped in my mind when I was putting this together, and especially reading through the great Core answer I told you about. It was just like that jumped out where I had heard that, and I was like, that makes sense. Especially if you're in a dev shop where they're primarily using that framework, then they're going to want you to know that framework.
That doesn't mean, though, that you have to not, you should understand how it works under the hood.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's what I'm dealing with at work where I am right now. Apparently, I'm the first one of the people there that has taken a Delphi DLL and brought it into .NET and made it where we can call it in process to do image processing, because I understand how .NET deals with images. I understand how the Windows API deals with images and how those two things are different. Because a lot of the people that are dealing with .NET imaging, they forget things like, oh, well, if I have a pointer to a byte array and I want to turn it into an image, .NET makes a copy. That byte array is still hanging around out there, and that memory is not being released, so your app leaks. And so getting away from the framework on that is very helpful. Like, you should probably be able to implement most things that you're having to deal with without the framework. Stuff like, okay, I'm going to talk to SQL. Like, okay, well, I'm not going to open a connection to SQL and actually talk to it using sockets. But I should understand how sockets work to the level that if I absolutely had to, I could get a start on it. Because then when SQL does something weird, I can fix it.
Yeah. Now, one thing that he does point out in his core answer is that these are things that you may not be able to learn or work on at work.
Yeah.
But you can solve the problems that the framework solves for you on your own time.
Or figure out how the framework works.
Yeah. In your pet projects, on your own, in your own learning time, because some jobs may allow for learning time, especially if you're more junior, but you really should be learning on your own too, to keep up your skills. And this is how you're going to move from a junior to a mid, or mid to senior to architect. This is how you advance, is showing the initiative and learning on your own time.
Well, a lot of developers feel like they should be able to go home and not write code. Mm-hmm. It's like that's fine, and you'll probably still have a job so long as the market holds up, but you're not going to move ahead as fast and get into situations that are more interesting.
Yeah.
Like you're going to be the guy turning the screws on the factory line.
Yeah.
And that's how you end up being a consumer of APIs instead of an actual developer.
And for some people, that's fine. But these people are not the kind that are going to be complete developers.
Right.
They're the 9 to 5.
Dark matter developers.
Yeah.
Effectively. They're there, but, there's a limit to what they actually get done.
Next, use code reviews for learning. And the quote I have on this one is, always pick someone who you believe to be better than you for your reviews. There's no point in choosing someone just because they'll set the accept flag without much back and forth.
Yeah, that just doesn't. Well, I mean, what's the point of that, right? That's just overhead for no reason.
Mm-hmm. You really want to be picky about who you get to review your code.
Pick somebody that's been successful, not just somebody that's oppositional. Because, obviously you don't want that either. Although sometimes that can actually be kind of handy too if you get somebody that's a little bit belligerent, because you learn how to argue the points and actually articulate why the way you're doing things works. And it will force you to learn. Yeah.
You really want someone that's going to have a good back and forth.
Yeah.
Because if you have someone that's belligerent, they may overpower you with logical fallacies.
Yeah.
Especially if you're not especially if you're not up on, all right, that's an appeal to authority, and
no, it's an ad hominem.
Yeah.
It'll be an ad hominem every time. It'll be like, you only do this because you ate paint chips as a child. That's why you use this language.
Yeah. So that and some other signs of a bad reviewer are ones that only accept code that looks like theirs. I mean, there's one thing to write the code so that it fits the company standards, but then there's another thing to only doing things a certain way, even if it's not the best way.
Well, and if you get a reviewer that learns something from your code, it's like, oh wait, that's a different way to do that. Like when that happens, that's when you really know you've got a good one, because they're looking for opportunities for themselves. Mm-hmm. That's the person you want to follow, even if they're junior to you, because they'll come up with stuff that you never thought about.
Yeah. Another sign of a bad reviewer is that they don't explain the why of doing something a certain way.
Yeah, and I run into this. Actually, I've had this interaction with old C programmers, because they'll say if some variable equal some value that's a constant, right? That's the way that us C# programmers write it.
Yeah.
C programmers go if some constant value equal some variable. The reason they do it backward is because if they screw up and they leave out one of the equal signs, it's an assignment. If you have it where it's the constant equal a variable, you can't assign to a constant and the compiler blows up. If you have it the other way, it goes on and runs.
I've seen that code.
That's why you see that.
Oh, that makes so much sense though.
And I don't know
that explains so much to me. I love that.
Yeah. That's
brilliant.
The why is deeply rooted in actual reasons. Like they've been hit by that a few times. It's the same reason, like at work when we're doing Delphi code, Wayne, he'll create an instance of something. He does a try block. He starts a try block and then he creates an instance of something and he has a finally block at the bottom and deallocates that thing before he does anything with it, and then fills that in. Like that's his process. And the reason is because in Delphi, if you don't delete it, it's still there. And that's the only way. Collection. Yeah. Like that's the only way you get rid of things. Well, it's not quite that. There's ways to do things where Delphi creates it and then Delphi is responsible for it. But this isn't, like in the method body, that's not the way that works. And so he does it that way because, hey, if you don't, you will eventually miss something. In fact, I did last week. I probably spent 4 hours trying to figure out why I was getting a memory leak. And it's because I did not do it that way and I missed one. And I do have that habit in .NET.
No, mind you, I'm very happy with what I'm doing. I love my job, but I am a little jealous that you're getting to learn Delphi because I really enjoyed Pascal in high school.
Yeah.
And so I there's a little jealousy, and I really enjoy listening to you talk about it because I get that vicarious Pascal through that.
Well, it's like what got me to really liking programming, which is actually VB.
Yeah.
Like classic VB is, you did have to deal with these issues. You didn't have to all the time because there was some real weirdness around the way objects were created. Like, oh, it's a COM interface, so yeah, you do have to delete it. But if it's this other type, you don't. And it's kind of the same problem you have in .NET, but like actually interacting with that, like it really teaches you a lot about how the computer works, and it keeps that foremost in your mind. So
yeah. And like I said, I'm very happy with what I'm doing, and it's very challenging for where I'm at.
Yeah,
it's like right at my level. It's really fun. I am still jealous that you're getting to do that in the good kind of jealousy. I want to hear about it so I can like program vicariously through you.
Which is weird because, just as an aside, you'll get two kinds of programmers that react to you learning Delphi, especially if you've been in .NET. You get the ones that are like, oh, wow, that's cool. That's a lower level. That's, harder stuff. That's neat. Or it's like learning C. And then you'll get the guys that are like, oh, this will be the the first and last Delphi job you ever have. Why are you doing this? Like, you're not going to be employable, blah, 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 And I actually interacted with one of those guys a few weeks ago. Yeah, because languages don't die.
No.
Like, that's not a thing. I mean, as long as there's somebody that still uses that language, it's very hard to shrink a computer programming language down to where no one ever uses it. Now, it might be harder to find a job in it than some other languages, but that would be true if I was learning, VB.
Yeah.
Because there's not a ton of those around. There's not a ton of Perl jobs or Python jobs in our area, but there's loads of people learning Python, comparatively compared to C#.
Yeah.
It's like, well, shoot, if I'm going to learn something that doesn't have a huge market, I want to learn something a little bit more difficult. And yeah, it's got the right mix.
The thing is, you're not abandoning .NET and C# to learn this.
Right.
You're adding to the knowledge you have. I think that's an important point.
It's a breadth thing instead of a depth thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's not replacing what you know, it is adding to it. And that's another big thing, I guess, one that kind of, it's a little off the set topics, but it still fits in with keeping your coding skills sharp, is you're not stopping your .NET and your C#
No, because
work.
I do that when I get home.
Yeah. It's like you're not giving that up, and it's not a zero-sum game, basically. You're adding to the knowledge you already have. And if, even if they're right and this is the first and last Delphi job you ever have, I'm not saying that it's going to be, but I'm just saying, suppose that they're right, and it is. So what? You learned something new. You enjoyed it. You provided value to the company.
And I got some practice having to deal with memory management in a way that's still going to be valid if I have to learn C.
Exactly.
Professional stuff. Like, knowledge is not something that typically has zero value. That's just, that's not an accurate assessment. Like, if you're assessing knowledge and going, okay, this has no value whatsoever, your assessment is probably more wrong than the knowledge is.
No.
And that brings up the next thing, which is teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I have gotten both bitten by this because we're doing the Code Newbies thing, right? And you threw out a code kata a few weeks ago, and I learned something about strings in .NET that I had no idea was the way that it was.
Which ultimately led to an entire episode on strings.
Well, and that was actually a link issue because I was doing I did a 2-char array, and then I tried to do some link operations on a string, or it was grouping. That's what it was. It was grouping on the characters in the array, and it returns this weird other.
You ran into the problems that I had when I tried to take the pseudocode that I wrote for the job interview for the job I have now. You ran into the issues I had when I tried to take that pseudocode and write it as real code.
Yeah. And you did it iteratively. And of course, I just was like, oh, I'm going down the rabbit hole. I'm not writing a for loop. I got into link purgatory so bad.
Oh, no, you were doing that on was that the string one or the math one?
It was a string one.
I ultimately got it down to where I did not have a for loop. But it took.
Yeah, and that was fun.
Yeah, it was.
But you'll learn a lot by teaching, because here's the thing. You can only run into so many problems yourself.
Yeah.
Like, you're a single thread searching for problems effectively while you're learning. If you're teaching people, you might have 40 or 50 people, 40 or 50 threads out there running, because not only are they running, finding problems, but their buddies are. And then they come to them and they come to you.
Exactly. So the quote I have for this goes right along with this. It says, sometimes you think you know something works, but then you try to explain it and realize you don't fully understand it.
Yeah.
So some suggestions that I had, Will's already brought up what we've done with the Code Newbie Nashville group, and writing up the challenges that we have each month, but also write blog posts and tutorials. I spent the weekend before last reading through the technical documentation on some stuff because there were no answers to the problem that I was having.
Yeah.
The way I was trying to do it. And I came into work and was able to get it to work on Monday because of that, and told my boss, I'm like, I'm going to write a blog post about this. Like, I'm not going to put the code I'm working on in there, but I will put some code samples as explanations. And of course, he was like, that's cool. That's fine. You know,
Yeah.
he's seen my blog, read it. He's cool. But, writing blog posts, writing tutorials, when you're explaining how to do something, you have to understand it at a deeper level than just being able to do it.
Yeah. And I mean, this is something I learned, blogging, quite a while back. Just getting the point across in a way that people can actually understand it is different than understanding the point in your own head because of the amount of clarity that's required, and you have to get rid of the ambiguity on things that you don't think are ambiguous.
Yeah. And another thing is you can also submit to speak at conferences, even if you're only giving a 5 to 10 minute lightning talk.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have to learn the material very well for that talk to feel comfortable getting up in front of people.
Well, and I'll tell you another one that'll help you is lunch and learn type things at work.
Yeah.
Because then you can say, okay, here's how we do this thing, and it's something that provides value for the company. If you play this right, you can get them to pay for sandwiches, and you can actually have food paid for something you should be doing to improve your skills so you can get paid more anyways. Like, it's like that double win thing. Yeah, I mean, actually, I'm planning on doing that here fairly soon.
Let me know and invite me.
Yeah, and the podcast thing was another thing. We've learned a ton. Podcasting, like that strings episode, like I've dealt with text at a low level quite a bit. But actually getting in there and going, okay, what, because there's all these weird things, like all the things with, diphthongs and all that nastiness. Mm-hmm. That was something I just had not ever dealt with. And part of the deal was I started out with the Win32 API in Visual Basic. Yeah. And that's where the bulk of that text processing low level experience was. Mm-hmm. Either that or in C++. Okay. And, later, of course, they get the string class and it handles all that under the hood, and I leaned on the framework. And when I revisited, it's like, hey, everything's internationalized now. Like, there's stuff you need to think about. And I never had to deal with that until I started trying to show other people how to do it.
Well, I know one thing that has helped me out is the design patterns episode that I wrote. Well, the series of episodes that I wrote. It started off as one, and then when I got done with it, I'm like, yeah, this needs to be 4 episodes.
Yeah.
That came up so much in interviews because here I am interviewing for junior developer positions, and I'm talking about stuff that some people did not even know about until they were senior developers. And not just talking about them, but holding conversations and able to compare and contrast different patterns.
Right.
I remember a phone interview like that where at the end of it, the guy said, he was just like, wow, he's like, I wouldn't expect that level of knowledge from a senior developer. And I did get that job, but that was one of those jobs that ended up being,
it took forever for them to hire you, and you're sitting there going, hey, what?
That's why I said I aced the technical interview on that in large part because of the stuff that I developed for teaching through the podcast.
Yeah. And the other thing is, like, try to teach yourself stuff that you never are going to use. Mm-hmm. Just the act of trying to teach yourself things. If you don't, if you don't have an audience or you're too nervous to get in front of an audience, the things I've had to deal with trying to do work with like neural networks has helped me with LINQ, because it's effectively, it's like in Python, you have list comprehensions. That's what it is. You're, that and dealing with matrices. It's that same kind of thing. Expression trees, a big thing that helped me with that was dealing with gene expression programming, because it's an expression tree encoded linearly.
I hadn't thought about it like that, but because my biology background, I've got...
So you can see how you can iterate over the tree, and you can compress it to where it's just a stream, because you know the arity of each function. And
I'm following you here.
Yeah. Well, like doing that and trying to figure out how to make something work like that in a strongly typed language like .NET or like C#, you kind of have to deal with expression trees, and you have to deal with them a lot. The next time you have to deal with expression trees, it's never going to be that bad. So you basically, it's like that. There's a book called Eat That Frog, I think. Yeah. So basically, like if you know you have to eat a live frog during the day, the best time to do it is first thing in the morning, because nothing else will be that bad.
Yeah.
That's what teaching is, and that's what teaching yourself, more difficult concepts is.
Where I have seen that recently.
Yeah, it's come up again recently. Like there was a resurgence in some of the business blogs or something, because it's...
Yeah, maybe it was on LinkedIn or something, or one of the business podcasts I listen to. But yeah, I completely follow you there. So, but that pretty much wraps us up. I mean, the idea here is use these techniques to keep your coding skills sharp, and they're not a lot of things to do, but it can take up a lot of time if you're really trying to do it right and really trying to be a complete developer. Before we close everything out, Will, what do you have for us this week for Tricks of the Trade?
I want to introduce a term that comes out of manufacturing, and it's called Kaizen. And Kaizen is the process of continual improvement. Now, this came out of Deming's work, I think in the 60s and 70s. He revolutionized Japanese manufacturing because Americans wouldn't listen to him. And then eventually the ideas came back overseas once we were getting creamed by the Japanese because they were outdoing us in manufacturing. But basically the idea is to keep tightening up the tolerances for whatever you're working on so that you produce better quality. And I guess that's probably a distilled down version of it. But basically, that's kind of what Beach is talking about here, is actually coming up with a process that improves the quality of your code as you go on. So, like initially, one thing that I've done with him is, implement something using, a for loop, and then figure out how, okay, I can do this with a for each, and then figure out how I can do this, with a language integrated query with a where, and then figure out how I can continue tightening it down. That continual improvement will produce a lot more than trying to necessarily get it perfect at first. The best example in the world of this is evolution. Evolution is an algorithm that essentially says, okay, I have an organism and I want to get as close to the possible survivable maximum for an environment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continually improve. I'm not going to jump by large segments. I'm just going to continually get better. That's kind of what you should do. And it's important, really, the reason I want to bring this term up is because if you deal with manufacturing, people that are involved with that sort of thing, and sometimes with project management, is if you bring up the term Kaizen and you know who Deming was and you actually read his materials, you will be light years ahead of most other developers. Plus, if you internalize it, it'll reflect back into your development work. So apply these industrial practices to your own practice, and I think you'll probably get a lot of gain out of it. That's what I got.
Stand by for Titanfall.
If you have a question or comment for us, please email us at neckbeards@completedeveloperpodcast.com. Our theme music is an excerpt from Stand By for Titanfall by Pure Bells, available on SoundCloud and licensed under Creative Commons. The intro music for IoTs is Hillbilly Hip Hop by Jason Belcher. For references, show notes, and to sign up to our email list, be sure and check out the website at CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CompleteDevPod and like our page on Facebook to keep up with the news about the show. Thanks for listening. See you next time.